Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in welcoming our webcast viewers. My name is Fred Mifflin, President of the Canadian Club of Toronto. Viewers, we're very pleased that you're joining us today. For 120 years, the Canadian Club has been proud to provide a forum for leaders in every aspect of society to share their ideas with us and to challenge our thinking. Through our programs and activities, we offer access to dynamic business, political and public figures from across Canada and around the world. Our guest today, Sebastian from Google, is a great example. Before I formally introduce Sam, here's a preview of some of our upcoming events. This Thursday, March 30th, we'll host a distinguished legal panel moderated by L'Expert's Editor-in-Chief, Jean Cumming, who will discuss the value and future of legal advice in ever-changing times. And next Tuesday, April the 4th, Ontario's Transportation Minister, the Honourable Stephen Del Duca, will be at our podium. To order tickets or to learn more about the club, please visit our website at canadianclub.org. You can also join the conversation via Twitter and Instagram by following us at CDNCLUBTO or by using that hashtag. I want to express special thanks to today's event sponsor, Borden Ladner Gervais, represented by Sean Weir. Thank you for your generous support. I also want to acknowledge the youth and young leaders who are with us today, thanks to Google, from Seneca College's Faculty of Communication, Art and Design and Ryerson University's Faculty of Communications and Design. Welcome and thank you for joining us. And now our guest speaker. Google. It's a company name, a verb, and a way of doing business. It has transformed the way we think, research, and get information online. From humble beginnings in a California garage, today Google employs more than 50,000 people in 50 countries around the world. Billions of people use its products and services. Google Search, Google Maps, Google Finance, you get the drift. The list goes on. Google's impact is pervasive and unmistakable. In Canada, you can find Google offices in Kitchener-Waterloo, Ottawa, Montreal, and here in Toronto. As Vice President and Country Director, Sebastian is charged with growing users, advertisers, and partners. The Ohio native has led Canadian operations since 2014. Its unconventional approach to business has earned many accolades. For 6 consecutive years, Google has been considered the best place to work in Canada by the Great Places to Work Institute. And Marketing Magazine has recognized it as the most influential brand for the past 4 years. Sam joined Google's Chicago office in 2006. While there, he held several executive roles. Before Google, he was a general manager and senior vice president at Classified Ventures. The Ohio State and Kellogg MBA grad started his career as an accountant and consultant at Arthur Andersen. So Sam, you're living proof that there is life after accounting. Here in Canada, he's a member of the Business Council of Canada and a director of several boards, including Tennis Canada and Bridget, a Kitchener-Waterloo startup. Sam is being joined in conversation with Bloomberg's Amanda Lang, a great friend of the Canadian Club. The focus of their discussion, innovation and risk-taking here in Canada. As I mentioned at the outset, if you have any comments or questions that you'd like addressed, please fill out one of the Q&A cards on your tables and one of our staff will collect them. Sam and Amanda, welcome. The Canadian Club of Toronto's podium is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred. And as Fred mentioned, we do welcome your questions. I don't know about comments, but questions for sure. On the moderator, we'll give those to him later. And I will work them into the conversation as they come, because as always, I think Sam will agree, if we're not talking about what you want us to be talking about, change the conversation, send me a question. It's not often that we get a country director of one of the biggest, most important tech companies in the world. So I actually want to start with what Google thinks about Canada, because Google has clearly made a bigger investment in this country, and you only have to go to the campus in Waterloo to know this isn't a kind of a check mark. It's not 2% of the total. It's actually,
Yep.
it feels sizable. So what's the thinking about Canada?
It's evolved. So I've been at Google for 11 years, and I still remember my first few years where, probably typical to some big multinationals that are based in the US and don't quite get it yet, we put a few folks up in Canada, we managed it out of the States, and we never really went anywhere, really didn't take advantage of the opportunity. But what happened was we acquired a small company in Kitchener-Waterloo, and we began to build an engineering base in KW. And then a startup guy who joined Google and was at Google in California, was Canadian and came back to run our Kitchener-Waterloo engineering office in KW. Steve Woods is his name, he's still there. And he began to kind of build that, but then also share the magic of what was going on in Canada with the rest of Google, especially California. And kind of shook us and said, guys, there's good stuff happening up here. If you want to be taken seriously and you want to grow the business and build great products and find amazing engineers, you got to invest here. And so probably 5 or 6 years ago, we really started to do this. Toronto was one of our first international offices. Again, it was just a very kind of small sales outpost. But 5 or 6 years ago, we really started to invest. And we've got 1,000 employees here in Canada across 4 offices. Kitchener-Waterloo, we have 500 plus engineers. We have 150 or 100 or so, mostly engineers in Montreal. And most of the team that handles safe browsing engineering is based in Montreal. We've got 300 or so business and marketing and operations folks in Toronto. We've got an Ottawa place for all of our government relations and a few other folks. So it's gratifying to see the investment that we have made, and we finally got it. And I'm hoping we're encouraging other similar tech firms, especially US-based tech firms, to do the same. I know Jordan Banks really well at Facebook, and Rory, who runs Twitter, used to work for me at Google, and they're now, I think, doing their best to grab California by the collar and say, there's something really cool happening up here.
So let's talk culture. One of my favorite culture stories is when Walmart went to Europe. Remember that? Walmart failed miserably in Germany, and one of the reasons was that Germans didn't like the greeters. It's a true story. So you can run up into different cultures. You're an American. There is a very distinct sort of Canadian culture.
There is.
Do you feel it? Does it matter?
Oh, it matters a ton. I'm Midwestern. I grew up in Ohio, spent 20 years in Chicago. So I think I've got a leg up on a New Yorker or a Californian who
Like
come
being
here.
from Winnipeg.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Is that a compliment?
Yes, it is. I'm from Winnipeg. I should say I'm from Winnipeg.
So in many ways, the focus on relationship and playing down the ego and a lot of things of what makes Canada great, I just had in my own upbringing. So that was kind of natural. What I didn't expect and what I read about but then really felt once we got up here is from a technology perspective, Canada, from a consumer perspective, Canadians love their technology. When we look at our product metrics and usage metrics, we over-index in video engagement and mobile usage and broadband penetration. We're usually in the top 3 or 4 of all countries around the world. So when you have the honor of running a company like Google in a country like that is so plugged in, that was a bit of an adjustment for me to make. The difference that I found is in the US, they made the adjustment from a company perspective a little faster than here in Canada, where e-commerce took off. A lot of big companies started to employ technology very quickly, some faster than they probably should have. And there's the gap between the companies really leaning into this technological and digital disruption compared to what the consumers are doing in Canada. A gap exists. What's nice to see is the gap is closing, and it's closing pretty fast. And that's part of our job, to help corporate Canada, small to medium businesses, frankly, catch up with the consumer.
We should probably clock, as human beings, how long we go between Trump references these days. It's not long. But for a business like yours, it's obviously a serious issue about bringing in talent and what happens in the US. Is that to our benefit here? Are you seeing any kind of conversations about that?
I still think it's too early to tell, but it's definitely had an impact. I've been at Google for a while, and we've had more town halls and more dialoguing with our employees in the last 6 months than we've ever had in my time at Google. The immigration ban, we employ a lot of folks from all over the world, and there was just lots of internal discussion. And it was actually an interesting position for me to be in. I'm an American. I run Google in Canada, who right now is probably one of the most progressive countries and is trying to be as inclusive as possible. And I was trying to kind of figure out the role to play. And I'm still being cautious because I don't want to be too opportunistic. I don't want Canada to say, everyone come up here, it's a disaster down in the US. Things will naturally happen. And so the approach we've taken is just to kind of reconfirm and recommunicate the values that Google has, which is one of inclusivity, of openness, of transparency, of fairness, of values, which tie in 100% to Canada. And our head of engineering in Montreal grew up in Aleppo, was a refugee and came to Canada 30 years ago. And he just wrote an op-ed in the Montreal Gazette about 3 months ago, but about his experience, thanking Canada and promising that the bet that they made in him will pay off if it hasn't already. And I still remember when Prime Minister Trudeau helped us open our office in Kitchener-Waterloo, Shibble, who is this gentleman, was there. And he took the Prime Minister aside and talked for 5 minutes, and they both Shibble started crying, and the Prime Minister started to tear up because Shibble was telling him about the story of Canada opening up its arms to a guy like him, and then what he's been able to do. And that story is Canada, and it's certainly Canada right now. And so I think that we'll have to see what happens in the U.S., and I have to think that they and we as an American will figure it out. But I think the more we can just reconfirm and recommunicate the values that both Google has and Canada has, we'll kind of see where the chips fall.
The other thing, obviously, that you would look to the federal government for is sort of shaping policies that'll drive the economy. Just in a macro way, are you feeling good about the Canadian economy?
I'm feeling good about the government's willingness to lean into an innovation economy and to begin to do what it can to diversify, so we've got a worldview of the next 20, 30 years. Am I a huge fan of the Canadian economy right now? I'm not quite sure. We were talking about it a little bit at the table. There's a little bit of uncertainty. We are so tied to the fortunes of the U.S. that I think everyone's a little bit of a wait and see. But I think the current government, coupled with corporate Canada, coupled with education institutions, coupled with research institutions, coupled with the incubators and accelerators on the technology side, something's happening right now where everyone is leaned in, and it's the perfect moment for us to place this bet, and then it's going to be up to us to see if it pays off. But from what I can tell, and I'm a new Canadian, I've been here 3 years, we've never had this much momentum and kind of things aimed in the same and right direction than we have right now, so it's good.
So the knock on Canada for years has been not that we don't have brilliant pure research, brilliant engineers, tons of startups, more startups than any country in the world, and that was true 15 years ago. We don't scale them up. They don't grow the way they do in other countries. They get to some kind of mid-size and then they sell or stall. Is that changing? Are you feeling a difference?
I think it's changing. So when I came up here, everyone grabbed me right off the bat and told me all the Canadian stereotypes. Some of them have played out, most of them haven't. But one of them was, we're not a very ambitious country. folks will start a company up, they'll sell it, they'll buy their cottage, and then everything is fine. They're all happy, and they've got their life. Sounds like a pretty damn good life, to tell you the truth, but what I found is quite opposite. What I'm used to is a Silicon Valley culture, and I see that in a lot of areas in the folks that I see. I mean, you've got ambitious founders like Ted Livingston at Kik and Stephen Lake at Thalmic and Ryan Holmes at Hootsuite. And then I'm on the board of a startup founded by two unbelievably talented women. Bridget is the name of the company. You've got Michelle at Clearbank. You've got founders who want to build the next platform business that will change the world. They're not trying to sell out. Dan DeBow is another great example. These are folks that are trying to change the world. That's what you see in California. That's, to a certain extent, some of the American ethos. But I think that's alive and well here in Canada. And I don't know if that's different than what it was before, but I don't know anything different since I've been here the 3 years. And what's nice is you have this startup momentum. You have the government that is starting to help. And then you have corporate Canada, where big banks that were kind of in this big oligopolistic structure who might not have moved as fast as they should have in the past, same with some telcos. You've got new blood at the top there with folks who are in boards that are saying, if we don't disrupt ourselves a little bit from within now, we're in trouble. Yeah. And so you've got leadership and so when leaning in. So when all those things line up, I think it's a perfect recipe, but I'd put a bet on Canada from an ambition perspective as much as I would in other places around the world.
You mentioned the government's willingness to lean in. They are making big investments in certain areas. Do you like what you see, and why are those the right areas?
So yeah, I do like what I see. More would always be nice, but eventually you run out of money, and this country doesn't like deficits. We love them in the U.S., but we don't like them here. So I get that there's some limit. But you know, just the recent budget with the focus on digital, the focus on artificial intelligence, those are two areas that I think will define the future. If you talk about an investment in digital, I would focus it less on. One of the reasons why the University of Waterloo is, why we hire so much from the University of Waterloo, is they have these co-op programs to get you great experience, and then you're miles ahead when you first started a company. There's been lots of talk about getting more co-op programs in universities. I think that's all well and good. I actually think we'll be fine for the next 5 years as a country. The thing that scares me is the next 20 years or 10 or 15 years. 98% of our engineers at Google have had exposure to computer science before they got to university. They had a spark when they were a kid, a science fair, or their dad bought them their first computer when they were 7 and they fell in love with it. They had these kind of magic moments of exposure to science, technology, engineering, and math early in their being. And then they followed it up, they became engineers, and they will be able to keep up in the new economy. My fear is, and I've got a 14-year-old and a 13-year-old, they don't get those magic moments as much as they should. So I'll be curious to see, and I understand that the provinces run with a lot of this, but there's got to be some sort of influence that the feds, and I know we're doing a lot of work in this area, to get more STEM education in the K through 6 range, so that you get exposed to what's possible with computer science. Because 20 years from now, every company in the world will be a software company. All the infrastructure driving an auto firm, an oil concern, a bank, is all based on software underneath. And if you don't have talent that can manage in that environment, that knows how to build software, or more importantly, to activate software for a use case, then we're in trouble. And that's my biggest fear for Canada, is that we aren't building that pipeline. So if the money against digital can influence that, I think we're in a good place. The second investment was $125 million against superclusters around artificial intelligence. This was a bet we made at Google 3 or 4 years ago. Almost all of our products now are laced with this type of technology, which is quite different than the original type of kind of programming. And it will change the world if it isn't already. And more importantly, yeah, it's good for products at Google, like photos. You can say, show me all the photos of my kids when we were building snowmen, and all of them will pull up. Or our language translation works faster. That's all well and good, but when you can scan diabetic retinopathy, which inflicts, I think, 400 million folks from around the world, and it's treatable as long as you identify it quickly, but there's not enough ophthalmologists that can actually find it. If you can take a picture of your eyeball and run it through a computer and identify right away if you're inflicted and you can get treated, that changes the world. And that's how we're applying artificial intelligence. So watching how that evolves and the fact that Canada is leaning in on that and they're making big bets, we're right along with it. All the great research that happened around the world in AI started here in Canada. One of the godfathers of AI, Jeff Hinton, works at the University of Toronto, also spends time at Google. We've got the talent here, and more importantly, we're bringing more talent back. The knock on us and Amazon and Facebook is we're hiring all these great Canadians and moving them to California. That's not true. We're moving some, and God bless them. California's great. Enjoy it. Eventually they'll be back. But we're bringing more and more great Canadians who specialize in this artificial intelligence area back to Canada because they want to work with the best and the brightest. And so if we can build that cluster of talent, that's why folks go to Google, not to make a lot of money. They go to Google because they want to work with people that think like them and that are extremely smart and that they get inspired by. If we can build those clusters here in Canada, it's huge for the country.
Some of them want to make a lot of money.
Some of them, yeah.
Just always a few.
It's a nice to have.
You know, we do have this early advantage in AI in this country, and a lot of interest from, it's not just Google. Several of the car companies have made their kind of the hub of this new technology here. What's going on? Why is that?
I think well, I'll give two answers. One is, and I don't think it matters, but one is folks just want to follow where the nice, bright, shiny object is. And it is bright and it is shiny and it can do a lot of good, but I'm still convinced, and I'm not an engineer, but I work at Google and I understand this much about artificial intelligence. I know the CEO at a bank understands this much, but they know it's the right direction. They understand the vision and they're just kind of all in, which is good. That's a good start. But when you think about the concept of artificial intelligence, which is take lots of data, run it into this program so that the program can learn and then it can make smarter decisions for life sciences, for agriculture, for Google, but also for identifying risk for an insurance company, for helping to process payments faster for a bank, for helping with customer service and manage through all the various different issues that big companies have. So I think the many companies in corporate Canada are understanding how this can apply to their organization and recognize, all right, it can make us smarter, it can make us more efficient, and it will continue to drive up the value of our firms.
So the businesses that are already well into sort of the dumb AI, if I can call it that, the early stage, anything customer facing is in this already. And we all know, Netflix says, because you watched this movie, here's a suggestion. We get that. We also get that there is some end game whereby your 13 and 14-year-old don't need to study anything because there's no job, because the AI is doing the law and the doctoring and the journalism and everything. I realize that's not an end game that's likely to happen in their lifetime, but that's sort of the fear.
It's the fear. I don't think it's the reality. It's definitely the fear, or I've heard it's the fear. But I mean, I just apply it to myself. So I'm 45 years old. I look like I'm 35, but I'm 45.
I was about to say.
Yeah, I know. You were about to say it. I'm 45. And I've been in the business world for 20 plus years. And when I first started Arthur Andersen, I didn't have a computer. we had these yellow work papers that we built all of our audit papers on. We carried this big file thing. We put all the work papers in there. I know there's as many auditors and accountants as there are right now at PwC and in Deloitte as there were when I grew up. But they're working faster, more efficiently. They're applying all this technology to take time away. I mean, I was a relatively smart kid coming out of college, and my job for the first year at Arthur Andersen was to add things up and write them down in this work paper. That was not a good use of my time. Now, you're taking smart folks right out of university, and you're throwing them at okay, well, here's all the data, here's what the computer said, now go apply and figure out what the financial controls need to be at this company, given all this data that just spit out. So I'm convinced that with technological advances, it just simply complements all the other jobs that are out there, makes them, and you just continue to kind of move up the value chain in the type of work that you're doing and the value that you can add to a process. Now, and I would argue the same for manufacturing jobs. I talk to the GMs of the world, the Magnus of the world. They have lots of robotics on their manufacturing floor, but they employ as many folks as they used to. And they're employing these folks with specific skills, and technology can complement the work that they're doing. So that said, I do think that it's our responsibility at Google, it's responsibility of many others to make sure that, especially with AI, which is a new technology, that we are evolving responsibly, and there will be ethical issues that are raised, and we have to spend as much time and give that as much investment as we do just the core underlying technology. So that definitely is something we have to balance.
It's funny, people are talking a lot about this lately. Just as we get everybody into the STEM category, we're going to need philosophers and ethicists.
Right.
And we may not have any left. 30 years, we may be having whole programs around ethics.
Well, my kids can't code, so I'll put them in through philosophy.
They should be philosophers.
Exactly. Perfect. My daughter could do that. She's convincing.
You make the point that AI is about data. Bigger the data, the more powerful the AI. What happens when AI and quantum match up? Is that the real kind of hockey stick part? Yeah.
Yeah, all our minds are blown. I don't know. You're talking over my head. AI is this concept of before you would build technology and you would build a program to solve a particular task. And if you had to solve multiple tasks, you just build a bunch of different programs. Artificial intelligence is you build a program that doesn't necessarily know the exact answer, but it's smart enough to take in a bunch of data, learn, and then it can answer various different questions and solve various different problems. Quantum, I think, just gives you even more computing power on top of those learning algorithms that just make it even more powerful, and you can solve even bigger problems. So the good thing about this is, again, I think if we continue to use this technology to solve the problems in the world, then everyone benefits. We're just going to be able to solve bigger problems. Singularity University, based in California, has philosophies on all these kind of things, and their basic premise is between AI, quantum computing, computing power, et cetera, every major issue in the world will get solved one way or the other. With the one climate is the only one that they're a bit vexed by right now. But every other major problem, you could probably bet in 30 years that technology will probably be able to address it, fix it, and make life better. We'll just all be dead because there'll be no ozone layer.
Singularity University, if you haven't heard of it, you look it up. It's co-founded by a Canadian, super cool. Question about internet users using social media in silos. And so the user data is not on Google's servers. How do you stay relevant in the face of that?
It's a big question. So my daughter is 14 and she lives on Snapchat. I work at Google and I don't even know how the hell to use Snapchat. It's over my head. My son is on Netflix. My son is on a bunch of different apps that don't go through Google. And so that's a challenge for us. We have to continue to stay relevant. We have to continue to make sure we're building products that folks want to use, both 35, 85, and 15. But it's also what makes this profession and this ecosystem so much fun. We're only 18 years old, 19 years old, and we're old and traditional right now when you look at technology companies. And we are paranoid as hell. We work like hell to disrupt ourselves from within because we're convinced that someone else around the corner is going to build something faster, build something better, is going to work harder, is going to have a better insight, and that's what keeps us sharp. So the fact that you've got apps that have taken off now, everyone spends all their time on their phone, we have to be as relevant in that space as we were on a desktop. I'd bet on us. I think we will. I think we have the right, the two founders that don't get caught up in the innovator's dilemma. They want to disrupt themselves from within and make sure they continue to stay relevant. But boy, it's hard, and fast, but so much fun.
It's fun, but it's also a challenge to manage a culture. We talk about a culture of innovation. It's really a culture of change.
Yeah.
And employees are humans, and humans hate change.
Yeah.
I literally just wrote a book about this. How do you make them happy, despite the fact that what you're asking them to do is be always ready for change? Free food, I know, is part of it.
Yeah, it's part of it, but very little part of it. This has been interesting. I didn't like change. I was an accountant. And I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and my dad was a school teacher, and I didn't like change. But I came to Google, and you're forced to deal with it. Within the first year at Google, I had 4 different bosses. We reorganized so fast because the business is moving so fast, the pace of technological change is moving so fast that you don't have a choice. So you within 6 months of being at Google, you very quickly recognize, oh, this is a different world. And I have to basically just kind of divorce myself from how I was thinking before and jump on the rocket ship and just try to hold on as best I can. And then something happens after being there for a while that changes you. I'm not as risk averse as I was before. I embrace change more than I ever have. I think I'm more open and transparent and inclusive than I ever was before. Because that's just how the organization works. And so at first, I think it's easier to get folks to work at our company and manage change when they're right out of school or when they're pretty young, because they're kind of used to that anyway. The hardest part is when someone works somewhere else, has worked there for 10, 15 years, and then comes to Google. Like, oh my God, what did I just do? But then after about a year, they're like, okay, now I get it, and I have to change my own way of doing things a little bit just to keep up. But what I love and they love about Google is they also take the values that come from folks who worked at McKinsey, GE, L'Oreal, a startup, and they add them to the culture. So the culture is always additive, it's always breathing, it's always forming, and Google is kind of what you make of it. But it requires you to embrace and be open to a fast pace, change, and as a manager, no one listens to you at all. You have to add a boatload of value for them to actually follow you. It's a very different way to work, but it's also how most every other tech company and culture works. And what I wind up talking about with many boards or CEOs is an RBC will probably have to take a little bit of that Google way of working to manage, to attract, to retain talent, and to manage in an environment that has to be that fast-paced if the underlying technology is software. And so I wind up talking with our partners and customers as much about the technology but I also talk about how we work. and how the change management required to kind of thrive in this type of environment.
So smart companies know when disruption is headed their way. The banks know it, media knows it, we see it. And the people running those companies know they should be doing things about it, and sometimes they even know what they should be doing about it. What's your advice to them about how to actually get it done? Because they're not. And the incumbent never does. It's not their fault. The incumbent never does. What do you say to them?
You're exactly right. So the
Can you say that
board,
again?
the seat, you're exactly right, right. You say I'm young, I'll say you're right,
Deal.
and we got a good deal going. It's so hard to move a big machine. Like, it's got to be so hard for Dave Mackay to pivot the RBC ship, or for Don to pivot Manulife, or et cetera. Because it's middle management, and it's the guts of the organization that is right here. And I saw, before I worked at Google, I worked in the newspaper industry, and I saw it. I worked for a company and the board, the publisher of every major newspaper in the U.S., the heads of New York Times, Washington Post, Gannett, Tribune, they got together, they formed a joint venture to start the company that I worked for. They built cars.com, apartments.com, because they saw classified advertising going down, and so they wanted to build an internet company that could replace that and would be the solution. The problem was the print seller who was selling to car dealerships for years didn't want to change, and so they knew exactly where they were headed, but they couldn't change because the guts of the organization didn't. So I think you have to do some acquisitions. I think you have to get some champions within the company, within the guts. I think you have to force in a new way of thinking. You have to make some bold moves, because if you just say the right things and you have the right mantra and you wear jeans on a Friday, it's not going to get it done. You've really got to commit, and you've got to get new blood in there that will totally shake things up. And it will be painful, and you'll have one-on-ones all day long about people that aren't happy, but then you know it's working, because folks are shaken up a little bit. So partnering with startups is not a bad thing as well, but if I ran a big company, I would acquire 5 companies a year just to get new ways of thinking, new blood, faster way of working. I have no time to do anything, but I joined the board of Bridget because I was convinced we were moving too slow at Google Canada. And I wanted to see how 2 24-year-olds would build a company and move at the speed of light. And I've learned more from those 2 founders than I'm sure the value I've added to that board. And I'm hopefully trying to apply those things to Google Canada so that we still work as fast as we possibly can. So you got to figure out how to get that inspiration into the company.
Sometimes to do that, to move faster, to get to the new place, you actually have to, the reason people don't do it, of course, is get out of things that are still working.
Yeah.
Still profitable businesses, but that will one day stop on a dime. I think banks and accounting. You think the blockchain, you think banks and accounting. It could be on a dime for those industries. We don't know. It's hard for a bank to shut down its business right now.
Yeah.
They mint money.
Yeah.
When you say speed up change, is that about embracing failure? Is that about letting people be wrong?
It is certainly a part of that. That too is what that's kind of a core tenet at Google. The reason I got this job in Canada was because I had a miserable couple of years in the US. I had success for 6 or 7 years, then I failed miserably for 2 years. I just hit a bump, but I got through it. And so then management said, you're ready, because you're resilient. You figured out how to get through it. You failed. You tried, but you failed, but you were resilient. Now let's have you go run a country. And that's, again, part of the DNA of,
What'd you fail at?
Google. Here's what I failed at. I was running a business in the US and it was flying. And I took my eye off the ball. And before I knew it, our growth stalled. My team was weak. because when things were great, I wasn't looking at the dashboard of what was coming down the pipeline. I didn't know. I just got soft, and I quickly figured it out. I quickly got us back on track, but I'll never do that again. We've had some great success the last couple of years in Canada, but I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh shit, we're not doing nearly as much as we should. And I'm always like Natasha and Christina, we had one of the best years we ever had last year. So I reorged in Q1. And I totally shook up the entire organization. And everyone's pissed off at me. I've got one-on-ones all day long, but I know exactly that it was the right thing to do because everyone was probably getting a little bit soft. So that was my screw up. I got through it. And I forget the question that you asked. But
how do you bring that culture to the whole place?
You have to prop up. You have to make sure that you're constantly talking about the folks that are taking risks, and you reward them regardless if that risk worked or not. It is hard. 5 years ago, we broke all of our ad systems. We made it much more difficult on our customers because we were convinced that mobile was going to eclipse desktop over the course of the next couple of years. And now 50+% of all queries that come onto Google are coming from a smartphone or a tablet, and less than that are coming from a desktop. And had we not had the courage to kind of screw everything up, both internally and with our customers, and force folks to kind of be ready for the mobile revolution, then we would be nowhere close to where we are now. So you have to have courage as an organization. You have to hold up folks that take risks. But it's hard. I mean, it is not easy, especially for a culture that is safe and rewards analysis and scenario planning and all of that. At Google, right or wrong, if someone has a great idea, boom, let's go do it. Fails, all right, let's fail fast, let's move on to the next thing. We almost have to move that fast to keep up with the ecosystem we work within. So
then let's use the last minute or two that we have. Can you translate that advice to Canada? Because we're kind of a company that's worked pretty well. We had this business that was solid out west, good employees, we're all pretty happy. We need to disrupt ourselves.
So we did an event last year called Go North. We invited 800 startup folks, corporate Canada, government, and we didn't talk about Google. We didn't sell anything. All we did was we put great startups on stage and had them talk about themselves and the great work that they were doing for 7 hours. And I'm convinced we need to do more of that. My kids, I don't want my kids looking up to Larry Page or Zuckerberg. I want my kids looking up to Ted at Livingston or the two founders at Bridget or Stephen at Thalmic. We've got amazing stories here, or Toby and Harley at Shopify. We have amazing stories. We just got to tell them more. And then once folks see that, like I'm lucky, I get a chance to see these folks every day. That's what keeps me inspired. The more we can kind of share those around the country and they see that, and there's innovation going on out west. In fact, much of the innovation we've had as a country started out west. We just have to tell that innovation story more, lift folks up, and then that winning begets winning. Folks will want to follow the folks that are trying to change the world. We just need to do more of that, I think.
All right. We have to leave it there. Please join me in thanking Sam Sebastian.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Sam. My name is Philip Tardif. I'm a director of the Canadian Club, and it's my privilege to formally thank our guests today. Sam, on behalf of the Canadian Club, I'd like to thank you for sharing your insights and showing to us how important innovation is to our economy. Your company, Google, leads by example. We're inspired and encouraged by your stories and by your achievements. Your 1,000-member Canadian workforce demonstrates that Canada has the bench strength to thrive for the next 150 years. Innovation and risk-taking are required to advance ideas, to implement new technologies, and to solve pressing problems. As you rightly point out, we must not shy away from making important investments in approaching our next 150 years. We'll continue to track your success and Google's, and I thank you very much. Amanda, as always, thank you for your insights and for leading the conversation today. Thank you both for being with us today. And before we conclude, let me extend another round of thanks to our sponsor for today's event, Borden Ladner Gervais. And lastly, we'd like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. To learn more about the club, please visit us at canadianclub.org. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at another event in the near future. Have a great afternoon.